They were the heroes from the future. Teenagers protecting the universe from those that would sow the seeds of chaos. Each had unique powers and abilities, and though they often had their differences, they came together to save the day as the Legion of Superheroes. Now you can be a part of their adventures and learn the history of the future in the Legion Clubhouse.
I think Jim Mooney draws the best stink lines.
He does.
Adventure Comics number 331, The Triumph of the Legion of Supervillains. Published April 1965. Written by Jerry Siegel with art by Jim Mooney. The Legion of Supervillains gets the upper hand, but the expelled Legionnaires may have a plan up their sleeve.
Oh, I'm so excited to get into this episode of the Legion Clubhouse, Matthew, because we are concluding our first two-part adventure for our heroes, or should I say, our villains.
We've seen plot points go from issue to issue, especially the time trapper thing that's kept recurring.
Yeah, but that's not a haha, fools, you cannot break through my Iron Curtain of Time. Tune in next week to find out if they break through the Iron Curtain of Time. This was literally a what now? Now that the evil has taken over the Legion of Superheroes, what will happen next? And I love seeing this.
Yeah, this is the first actual two-issue, two-parter, as far as I can tell, in Legion history. And I went back and I actually did some minor research to support that claim, and then I got distracted by something shiny. But I'm almost certain this is the first time. The adventure 330 to 331. And the way that we set it up brilliantly, we meant to do this. We also gave you the cliffhanger last episode. To lead into this Adventure 331 discussion.
So once you are an evil villain, Dynamo Boy, once you have kicked all the members of the Legion of Superheroes out, what are you going to do with a big empty clubhouse? How are you going to prove to the world that you're still good? And how are you going to let people in on the word that you're a good guy?
Obviously tryouts. And so we get what is it, 4 of the best tryout characters we have. We have Golden Boy. You know, he can turn everything into gold, but come on, if he could turn everything into gold, the price of gold would just plummet and gold wouldn't be worth anything. So be gone with you, Gold Boy. Then there's Pony Boy. No.
Oh.
Polecat.
Oh, I thought it was Pony Boy. Golden Boy and Pony Boy. But Polecat, he has the power of Stinky LePew.
And once again, we see how wonderful Jim Mooney is at drawing hideous people with weak chins and big noses and, strangely enough, weird horns on their head.
Oh, man. Animal Lad, I think, is probably one of the best contenders for the Legion of Superheroes.
I agree. Animal Lad could have been terribly useful as a legit Legionnaire, because you remember when Jungle King attacked with his animals?
Yeah.
You remember the fourth dimensional animals, the one that looked like a pyramid with legs and one that looked like an Illuminati? Those are all animals. Animal Lad can control animals. He can make wild animals tame, and the only thing wrong with him is that he's too honest.
Well, the cool thing is he can also turn humans into beasts.
True. So he could turn Ultra Boy into an Ultra Energy beast to fight off evil beasts.
He might even be able to take Lone Wolf and turn him into a Timber Wolf.
Nah.
No.
He'd turn him into a chicken just to, he doesn't want to be too on the nose about things.
Yeah, it's really interesting. There's a couple of coloring panel issues. So Dynamo Boy decides to use his belt that we talked about in the last issue and check everyone's auras out to make sure that they are, cosmically aligned to be evil. And unfortunately, Animal Lad doesn't have that.
He is too honest.
Are you into all your auras?
Cannot be tempted. Yeah, red aura means that you're evil, and a purple aura means that you have excellent potential for crime, and a blue aura means that you should be slapped in the face every Thanksgiving. A green aura, I believe, we can't talk about that in a all.
I don't think you've read the auras right. So we got red.
And the brown aura gives you diarrhea.
No.
I'm thinking of M&Ms, aren't I?
Red focuses on the physical qualities of life. They have love. Orange are thrill seekers and daredevils. Magenta is a rare aura color personality. Magentas are the nonconformists in the aura spectrum. Oh. So maybe that's who
they're called unconformists, because nonconformist is what you conformist would call.
Yellows are the most fun-loving, free-spirited, energetic, and childlike personalities. Mm-hmm. Then you get into the tans. You got logical tan, who are very logical and analytical. Oh, I'm sorry. You have a whole bunch of tans. You also have environmental tan. It's the deep tan-colored band. Let's see. These tans experience their reality by physically touching their environment and then mentally analyzing it. You also have sensitive tan. Their personalities are subtle combination of mental tan qualities as well as the emotional blue qualities. You have abstract tan. You have green. They're some of the most powerful and intelligent people in the aura spectrum. You have blue.
Don't forget the Saint-Tropez tan, which you only get from Ban du Soleil.
Well, there's also sienna brown, but that's just the color of my wife's car. You also have the blues. They're some of the most loving, nurturing, and supportive personalities in the life colors. There's violet. Violets are the inspirational visionaries, the leaders, the performers, the therapists, the teachers. And then you have crystal. Crystal is the rare life colors. They have clear auras and are known as aura chameleons.
Or chameleon.
You have lavender, who are all about fantasy and enchantment, dreams, myths, spiritual beings, angels. And then you have indigo, the most recent aura color to arrive on the planet. They usher in new energy, a new consciousness, and a new age of peace and harmony. So there you go. There are your aura colors, which is why it's really odd when the Legion of Supervillains shows up. And Dynamo Boy points his belt at them, and he finds out that they're purple. Oh, purple auras. They're lying. They're up for bad stuffs.
They're bad and evil. They claim to have reformed.
Why would they claim that they've reformed? Are they going, oh, here's a dumb kid, we can trick him?
I don't know. This story makes zero sense to me. Because Vorm has literally thrown everybody out of the Legion.
Yes.
And he's trying to create a new Legion.
Mm-hmm.
But, okay, first of all, let's discuss the ludicrous bylaws of the Legion of Superheroes. From a procedural standpoint, parliamentary procedure means that this new kid comes in, he's been in the Legion for 2 days, he's able to fire everybody, including the founding members who wrote the Legion bylaws and constitution. Then he's able to induct a bunch of grown-ups.
Oh,
and you know they're grown-ups.
But he talks about it. He goes, I went in and I changed the bylaws that will allow adults into the Legion. So Legion of Supervillains who are truly reformed, you're welcomed in. And this is really brilliant because, Matthew, when we go forward to the late 1980s and we get into your favorite era of the Legion, the 5-year Legion, this bylaw that Dynaboy wrote in actually allows them to be adults and still be in the Legion of Superheroes. You laugh.
I do.
But this is the out.
Ridiculous.
Oh, adults in the Legion of Superheroes. Ridiculous. No, this is a brilliant out.
No. It's dumb.
No, I think it's brilliant. I think it's a way that, future writers can go back to this first 2-part story and go, aha, now I can let these characters age and let them not be teenagers. They can be 21-year-olds and still be in the Legion of Clubhouse. Or they could be grandpas and be Cosmic King. And
be their own grandpa.
Oh, man, we get a bunch of reorigin stories again.
We do, and it's interesting because it hasn't been that long since we saw the Legion of Supervillains origins. It was in episode 4 in Superman 147, which wasn't more than 3 years ago at this point. But again, Weisinger believed.
Right. Every issue is the first issue.
Turns over every 2 to 3 years. You have a whole new audience. And that's the point where you can recycle your story.
Yeah. So we get the origin of of
Cosmic
each of the
King.
Yeah, of Cosmic King. And we find out about his alchemical accident where he actually accidentally got under the sun lamp too long. We also get the origin of Saturn Queen and her powers.
I was born on Saturn. The end.
Then the final origin story we get is Lightning Lord. And Matthew, if I am not mistaken, are we not getting yet another retcon of Lightning Lad?
We are getting Rand's origin like take 6, because when we first saw it, Garth said, I was struck by an energy beast on planet Korbal that gave me powers. And then they retconned it to where I and my twin sister were struck with the lightning beasts of Korbal. And now we're seeing it told where Lightning Lad, his twin sister, and their older brother, Marlon Perkins, as drawn by Jim Mooney, were all struck and empowered at the same time by the lightning beasts of Korbal, who strangely enough have traffic cones on their heads.
So let's talk a little bit about this, because this is jumping into future episodes and past episodes and everything that's going on with Lightning Lad.
Yes.
I can understand if I am Lightning Lad and I want to have a unique power. If I'm trying to get into the Legion of Superheroes, maybe I don't mention that my twin sister is there.
Right.
I also, if I am a twin sister whose brother has recently died, I'm probably not going to mention that my older brother, who is not a twin and who does not have a twin, was not there, because, you know, Lightning Lord becomes a supervillain.
Yes.
And has always been an outsider. And this is something I don't know if we've talked about before in Legion Clubhouse or not, but the planet that these kids come from, Wynneth, they're all twins. They're all born as twins. So Lightning Lad and Light Lass are twins. And Lightning Lord was one of the few people that were ever born without a twin. And so he's considered an outcast. And depending on, again, I don't know if it's ever expanded upon in these early Legion issues, but I definitely know in the Archie Legion that his origin story is gone more in depth. And also in the 3-boot Legion, I think they go more into depth on how this older brother is an outcast and has always been considered weird and different. And it may be society that kind of turned him into an evil overlord type being.
That actually, I think that mostly comes out of the 80s, right before and especially during the 5 years later Legion, where they start to examine the question of whether Mecht is evil because he's not a twin, or whether because he's not a twin, Mecht becomes evil because he's treated differently. He's treated terribly. So it's a really fascinating look at whether, you know, is it nature or is it nurture? And by the time of the 5 years later Legion, they clearly are saying that Mecht is basically a nice kid driven insane by being treated so differently, being treated as an outcast among his own people. And he ends up really redeeming himself and being, you know, a supporting character in that Legion, those Legion stories, because his siblings finally accept him.
Yeah. It's really crazy. It's fascinating. Of the 3 Legion of Supervillain members that we have met, Lightning Lord is always the one that I find the most tragic of them, right? I mean, we can look at a Cosmic King and we can go, here's just a jerk guy. And we can look at Saturn Queen and we can go, born on the planet Saturn, big deal. But we look at Lightning Lord and we're like, whoa. Everything you said, nature, nurture, look at how the community raised this child or didn't raise this child. Look at how his younger siblings are trying to write him out of their history.
Yes.
Oh, it's so fascinating to see that.
It really is. It's interesting because when he tells the origin in Superman 147, Mecht explains that he and his brother were in an accident. When Garth first tells the origin, I was in an accident, blah, blah, blah. When Ayla shows up in Adventure 308, we get a retelling of the origin where Garth was there and also Ayla.
Yeah.
And it's kind of fascinating because there's no story until now that has all the elements. We have Ayla's version, we have Mecht's version, we have the version that Garth tells his friends, and it's like now we're getting the whole story, and it really supports that theory that Mecht is a dirty family secret that you just don't talk about.
Yeah.
And that may be what made him evil. I really do enjoy that kind of take on the character.
Yeah. So I will give Jerry Siegel some credit for trying to create a cohesive backstory for these three lightning characters, but there's something that's just maybe a little odd again that I'm sorry, listeners, I have to point this out. The first thing that Lightning Lord does to prove that he has powers and can help Dino Boy is that he brings out a statue of Prody 1 and disintegrates it. Now, we know, because we're all secret members of the Legion Clubhouse, or official members of the Legion Clubhouse, we know
Legion,
that Lightning Lad died, which was real tragic. It was horrifying, but then Edward Hamilton came back with a way to bring Lightning Lad back to life, and as we find out, the character that had to sacrifice himself, or did sacrifice himself, was Prody, made up to look like someone else.
Mm-hmm.
Edward Hamilton created an awesome moment in comics history, and in this issue, Jerry Siegel is destroying that moment.
In this case, while I do agree with you that Siegel does have some issues in terms of respecting characters he didn't create, as we see in this issue when he, punks out the substitute heroes.
Yes.
I think that the Prody thing, you may be reading more into it.
You know what? I'm going to continue to do this. I'm going to continue to do this because I think that there is something there. I need to read some biographies of Siegel to really find out what kind of a person he really was. But, man, these little subtle jabs, consciously or unconsciously, are really kind of creating a division inside the Legion of superheroes creators, to where you can see where some people are like, I'm not going to write this. Screw this guy. I'm going to destroy this cool thing that he created.
Well, I'm not going to argue on parts of it, because this issue and the next, which we'll get to later in this episode, friends, this issue and the next have different creators. It goes from Siegel to Hamilton. And I don't think we've done that in the middle of an episode before. And I really do agree with you. You do notice it. It's as though Siegel is, almost derisive of parts of the Legion story that aren't his, because when the LSV joins Dynamo Boy's New Legion, the subs show up, and the subs are like, ya-ta-ta. This is the first time the substitute heroes are played as completely useless.
I don't know if they're completely useless. I think they're trying. I don't think this is like a bouncing boy kind of moment, but this is one of those where they're literally trying to use their powers the right way, but they may be going up against the wrong villain for themselves. For example, Shadow Lass has an awesome shadow bomb, which I think is brilliant, but she's going up against somebody who is mental powers.
Yep. And Saturn Queen's mental powers trick her into thinking she's in sunlight, which, granted, beautiful. Lightning Lord blows up Chlorophyll Kid's super fast vegetation.
Sets it on fire, right?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. It's like the chaparral in California. Happens every summer. But it really does feel like the 5 substitute heroes should have made a slightly better showing. I mean, even Stone Boy, who got Legion membership, you will remember, who was made a Legion member but chose to stay with his pals. Stone Boy gets punked out by Cosmic King in 2 panels flat, and then we don't see him again.
Yep. So it looks like with the substitute heroes gone, that now it's time for these Legion of superhero villains to be able to take control. And since Dynamo Boy is like, look, I've got this plan. We're going to just make everyone think we're heroes, but we're going to just be, pocketing some of the goods when we go and help people. And this works great until Dynamo Boy goes back to Pirate Planet. And he's going to get crowned the hero of the day.
The king of the pirates.
Tries to put a crazy crown on him, but Dynamo Boy grabs it from him, puts it on the Pirate King, and finds out that this hat was going to kill him.
Yes, well, it wasn't going to kill him. It was going to scramble his brainwaves and make him into basically someone who cannot put together a coherent thought. And so instead of becoming an incoherent mess, I shouldn't say that because he exists in this story. Instead of becoming in-universe an incoherent mess, the Pirate King becomes an incoherent mess, and Vorm, a Dynamo Boy, is given the new role of King of the Pirate Planet.
So he's going to go back and celebrate with his fellow Legion of supervillains, only they know that he doesn't need to stick around. We don't need young kids sticking around. So they fly back and they trick him into thinking that they have single-handedly destroyed all the members of the Legion of Superheroes. They have, when Superboy arrives, they have Superboy, fly in, and they're like, our leader, please try to get away. So he jumps into the Legion of Supervillains time ship, and he tries to get away, but they have sabotaged it to send him 30,000 years into the future.
Colonel Buck Rogers.
Oh, kind of like that.
The thing that's great about this, well, not great, actually quite evil, Dynamo Boy is stranded in the far future with no food, no hope, nobody to save him, no chance of resolution.
That we know of.
No. Would you like to know the next appearance of Dynamo Boy?
When?
There is no next appearance of Dynamo Boy.
Well, yeah, because so in the DC history, right, we go up to the era of the Legion of Superheroes, and maybe we go a little bit further. But the only two major far future storylines that we ever really see is Superman, the last man on planet Earth, where he's like, everyone is wiped out and the sun is dying and he's there. And then we also have DC 1 million, which takes us 1 million years into the future. So we have really no idea what happens to Dynaboy because he has sent trillions of years into the future.
He is left in the far future to die.
Yeah.
He does not ever appear again. And so, as readers who have to believe what we see in the comics, we have seen Dynamo Boy left to die by the Legion of Supervillains.
So, you say left to die, but I mean, we don't know that the planet is totally desolate. I mean, he could find some, Twinkies. Their shelf life is forever.
Okay, this is not an episode of Family Guy. He's not going to find the hidden Twinkie factory in Natick. He's on a devastated planet with nothing to survive. And the last we see of him is sitting on the edge of a cliff in utter despair, going, "Oh man, I lost." He's going to die.
He also has a ship that he should be able to fly off. Even though he may not be able to travel in time, he should still be able to fly off to another planet.
They sabotaged the ship. They transmuted his power belt into dust.
Okay, let me put a positive spin on this.
Okay.
He now has time enough at last to read all of the books he's been waiting to read.
Time now. It's not fair. His eyes will fall out as soon as he picks up the book.
Probably. So what happens to the Legion of Superheroes? I mean, now we have the Legion of Supervillains in charge. Oh. And they trick them.
But it's a Siegel story. And
so we have to wrap it up in like 6 panels, right?
Right, and we have to wrap it up with one thing and only one thing, and that is something derived from Jerry Siegel's intellectual property.
Oh, so Superboy must have to.
This is the villain. Yeah, Superboy comes in to save the day.
You don't like this story, do you?
I don't like this issue. Well, I have always felt this is one of the earliest Legion tales that I encountered. I felt like the first half of Dynamo Boy's story sets up something weird and interesting, and it does it in some dumb ways because we're supposed to believe that Sunboy is hooked on pep pills, and we're supposed to buy that the new kid is suddenly able to rewrite the Legion bylaws as he goes, but
he's in charge.
But this half of the story doesn't really feel like a continuation of the previous half. It feels like let's keep throwing new things at the wall until the last 3 pages when we run out of room.
Yeah. I don't know. I still like the new sub-bylaw that now no one remembers until someone turns 21 and says, look, I can still stay in. I think that's good. I think the Shadow Bomb is really cool. Yeah. But I have a question. A really important question for this issue. We've got Animal Lad, we've got Stink Boy, we've got Mediocre Kid, we've also got Tusk Man.
The Tusker, we've got Golden Boy.
So technically they have been rejected from membership into the Legion of Superheroes. Do they now qualify to be members of the Legion of Substitute Heroes?
Well, No.
Boo, why not?
Well, I can tell you what happens to them if you cue the American Graffiti closing remarks.
Okay.
Actually, I think I'm going to use the Animal House version. Animal Lad, better known as Ennis Johnson. His name is Ennis Johnson, you guys. Animal Lad is rejected from the Legion and basically gives up on his heroic career and instead goes into animal husbandry and works at the Center for... This is true. This is canonical.
Okay.
He works at the Center for Endangered Species Control, helping to save the dying animals and the endangered species of Earth.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Now, Polecat, Daffy Marin, this is his sole appearance, with the exception of an appearance in the Who's Who in the Legion of Superheroes 20 years later. He has no real power. He has nothing. He doesn't show up again. This is it.
Probably
but
good.
The Tusker, one Horace LaFoe, and Golden Boy, Clint Stewart, actually end up in the Justice League of Earth, which is Earthman's xenophobic evil organization from Superman and the Legion of Superheroes just a few years ago.
Now, I know, and we say a few years ago, we're talking about a few years ago from present time listeners, not a few years ago from the publishing of this book. Right. Earthman is really, that is a really troubling storyline, and I'm sure we will get to it eventually. But man, I'm now very curious about how these two ended up in his Legion.
Yeah, the Earthman story is really unpleasant, and it's really sad to see Tusker, who makes a couple of other appearances here and there, never joins the Substitute Legion, but I believe at one point appears in a Substitute Legion story, whereas Golden Boy never appears again until he joins Earthman's League. And I believe that all of them, including Earthman himself, end up in the giant Legion of supervillains, rather, in Legion of Three Worlds. But that story is when we get to that story, I'm calling in sick.
If you enjoy the show, we would appreciate your support. You can find out more and become a Legion Clubhouse member at patreon.com/major spoilers.
Did you read the letters page of Adventure Comics 332?
Let's say I haven't, and then read it together.
Okay.
Dear Editor, I thoroughly enjoyed the Bizarro Legion. In fact, the whole February issue. There were several reasons. 1, I never tire of the zany Bizarro antics. Number 2, the ending was fine, requiring some quick-thinking Legionnaire teamwork. And 3, the Know Your Legionnaires feature was great. However, in this text you overlooked Lone Wolf, as well as Command Kid, who was dropped from membership. Otherwise, the whole issue was great. A final note, with the exception of Superboy's best friend, the 100 new feats of Superboy surpassed all your other Hall of Fame classics combined. That's Dale from Hanover, New Hampshire.
Dear Dale from Hanover, New Hampshire, Lone Wolf was not included in the text because he has not officially joined the Legion, and Command Kid was one of several youths who have been members only briefly. Editor. Sorry, so I had to use the tone that goes.
I know. I should have used the actually voice for young Dale.
Dear Editor, have the Bizarros changed their addition tables? In Jimmy Olsen number 80, a Bizarro says that 2 + 2 = 5.5. But in the February Adventure Comics, Bizarro Brainiac 5 gets 3 as the answer. Daryl Von Buer, Clinton, Iowa.
What are you, some kind of nerd? Anyway, the editor says, the Bizarros consider Earth people stupid because no matter how many times they work a problem, the answer is always the same. The Bizarros could figure out 2 + 2 a dozen times and get a dozen different answers, and the only answer they'd consider wrong would be 4. Wow. Didn't expect that, did you?
No, you didn't see that. Nobody expects the Bizarro Inquisition.
Dear Editor, in the 100 New Feats of Superboy, the Boy of Steel says, and while I've often endured the sun's heat of 20 billion degrees, I've never visited this star, the hottest one in the universe, over 10 billion degrees. I'm sure this is a 100% goof, says Bob from New York.
Oops, it looks like the Bizarros got some of their wacky mathematics in this story too. Seriously, the sun's heat should have been given as 20 million degrees.
Wah, wah.
Dear editor, since Bouncing Boy is no longer in the Legion, why do you have his picture in the Legion Outpost logo? Are you going to bring him back? Robert from Albany, California.
Oh, I love this answer. This is what the editor says. We have definite plans for Bouncing Boy, so don't be surprised if one of these days he comes bounding back into action. This is probably one of the most important things that I think we get out of this Legion Outpost, and especially in this issue, is that it's saying, hey, rest assured, everyone, your favorite Bouncing Boy is coming back, so don't worry. And this is kind of neat because in this day and age of comics, you have sites like majorspoilers.com that get press releases, and we get news about things that are coming up, and we have previews catalogs that are 3 months ahead, so we kind of have an idea of what's coming down the pipe. But it's good to know that, and I don't remember when Bouncing Boy shows back up, but it's got to be another 10 issues or so from now, that we are getting word from editorial saying, hey, don't worry, this guy's coming back. Dear editor, I enjoyed the Bizarro Legion. However, there's one thing that bugs me. I can't believe you could fit 20 Legionnaires plus trophy rooms, library, and so on into that one small clubhouse, says Richard from Los Angeles, California.
Dear Richard, we couldn't if the clubhouse consisted of just what can be seen from the outside. But beneath the land on which it is built are vast underground chambers. Thus, the clubhouse is like an iceberg. Only a small portion is visible on the surface.
That's interesting because that will be in itself retconned not too long from now.
Yeah, it's definitely not something that I've ever seen referenced in an actual story.
Yeah.
Dear editor, you have presented 4 legions so far. The Legion of Superheroes, the Legion of Substitute Heroes, the Legion of Super Pets, and the Superheroes of Lalar, formerly the Legion of Super Outlaws. Now, how about another legion using suggestions from the bits of Legionnaire business? David from Albany, New York.
Well, we'll be using more of these suggestions in future stories, but how we'll use them is something we'll save for a surprise. By the way, you forgot 2 legions, the Legion of Super Villains and the Legion of Stupor Bizarros. Dear editor, I enjoyed the feature Know Your Legionnaires. Lately, you've been presenting these little extras in your magazine, explaining or highlighting parts of the Superman legend. It's a brilliant idea. I hope you continue it, says Carrie from Ohio.
Rest assured, we'll be bringing you these extras whenever we have space available. You'll find some in the Superboy 80-page Giant now on sale, as well as in the next Superman Giant.
There you go. There's your Legion Outpost.
Did you see Carrie?
Yes, Carrie Bates from Dayton, Ohio.
Yeah, you know who that is?
No, who is that?
Carrie Bates began submitting actual story ideas to DC Comics as early as 1964. And is best known for a very long run on Action Comics. Cary Bates is a well-known creator. Wrote Superboy.
He
wrote Legion.
The name sounded familiar, but I was just like, is this one of those things, or I'm just reading too much into this again?
No, it's interesting. You remember Bob from earlier?
Yeah.
Bob is Bob Rozakis, who is a DC editor and writer, best known as the Answer Man. He actually had a column in DC Comics in the 70s where people could do, much like this bits of Legionnaire business stuff, write in and say, hey, Bob, what about X, Y, and Z? And as the Answer Man, he would tell you what the answer is.
That is fantastic. This is why reading these Legion Outposts are so important.
Yeah, 2 future DC pros in 1 letter column, ladies and gentlemen.
Wow, that is awesome.
Adventure Comics number 332, The Super Moby-Dick of Space. Published May 1965. Written by Edmund Hamilton with art by John Forte. After a terrible injury, Lightning Lad becomes obsessed with a space monster. Can he escape a second death at the beast's hands?
How does that the little Sunday school song go about Jonah and the whale?
Oh, hell if I know. Jonah was a whale, a la-di-da-di-do.
I don't think that's how the song goes, Matthew, but
Jonah was a whale, a la-di-da.
We do, in this issue of Adventure Comics 332, we do get another whale of a story. See what I did there?
Oh, whale of a tale have I for you.
So what's going on? What's going on here? I mean, this is another interesting, tragic story for Lightning Lad.
Well, the first thing that's going on here is holy moly, Hamilton's back. So I like this story.
Yeah, but you don't like him. I thought you said you didn't like him because of his stiff character work.
John Fort, actually, I have come to love his stiff character work. And even after Mooney last issue, I'm like, oh, Saturn Girl looks like herself again. Lightning Lad looks like he has a stick up his bum. Speaking of Lightning Lad, this story is a big Lightning Lad feature. And it's one of the reasons why in the 80s, Lightning Lad repeatedly refers to himself as the unluckiest Legionnaire.
Yeah, there's a giant space thing that's traveling.
It's a space whale.
Is it really a whale? Because
it's a space whale. He has the face of a whale, the wings of a bat, the tail of
a mermaid.
Tail of a mermaid, and spots like an octopus.
And he has an appetite for metal. Anything metal, he's going to go after. And so
eat and eat.
He attacks a spaceship. He attacks a mining colony. Lightning Lad shows up and sends his lightning beams at the beast, and they ricochet off of its iron hide and hit Lightning Lad in the arm, which suddenly turns green. I think he's got lead poisoning, Matthew, but he passes out before he's able to get back to Legion headquarters.
Yes, and when he gets back to Legion headquarters, Brainiac 5 immediately summons the greatest authority on all space-dwelling creatures, one, Dr. Lanfear, who says, nope, it'll have to come off.
They'll have to cut it off. And so Lightning Lad wakes up and he's got a new metal arm.
Yes, a very, very awkward sort of primitive looking arm, which is strange for 30th century technology.
Yeah, retro history, yes, I would say. Or retro futurism, yes, I would say it looks somewhat primitive. But for the time period, I bet you this was right up there. You have to remember, too, that coming out of World War I and World War II, there were huge advancements in prosthetics and artificial limbs. But one of the things that you probably would never have seen would be a full hand. Most people that I had ever encountered that had lost an arm or a hand or something had the hook hands, right? So they could open it up and pinch and grab something. But you would never see anyone who had a full metal hand that was anything other than a prop, right?
That's there Stanley for aesthetic Kubrick's best Full Metal Hand.
Yes, aesthetic purposes there.
Yeah, I agree.
So, what were you going to say? Sorry.
That's okay. I don't think it's lead poisoning because when Superboy engages the creature, we discover that the green radiation it's giving off is actually kryptonite.
Oh, man.
I believe that Lightning Lad lost his arm to advanced kryptonite poisoning.
Wow, that's an interesting way to look at it. Definitely, yes. So we know Edmund Hamilton does a great job in storytelling.
Yes.
And if you are a kid growing up in the 1960s, the last thing you want to read is some smelly old book on the shelf. And so Edmund Hamilton takes the rest of this Legion Clubhouse story and turns it into Moby-Dick. Oh, yes. No, I'm sorry. Super Moby-Dick.
In space.
In space.
It really is interesting, and he stops to explain the legend of Moby-Dick to Superboy.
But that's the part that doesn't make any sense. Superboy grew up in the 1960s. Moby-Dick would have been like required reading material in his class. So Superboy should have just shrugged his shoulder and said, no, let me tell you the story of Moby-Dick that I just finished reading in my 11th grade English class.
Well, this isn't a Jerry Siegel story. Superboy doesn't have to do everything. But yeah, I do agree with you. I would have preferred to see that story told to maybe Brainiac or Saturn Girl or someone who's not actually from Earth.
You think Brainiac would have already known that story?
Yes, Brainiac certainly would have, and probably Saturn Girl as well. In fact, all of the Legionnaires in this issue, with the exception of Ultra Boy, are either from Earth, so likely to be at least aware of Earth's traditions in terms of literature, or telepathic or smart enough to have figured this out. So Ultra Boy should have been what they call in, I believe they call them in Star Trek, the cabbage head, that the engineer gets to explain the psychobabble to.
So they send out, the people are like, we got to catch this thing before it destroys all the metal in the known universe. And so they put a bounty on this giant Super Moby-Dick whale in space. And Ultra Boy is like, I'll go do it. I've had experience with space whales before. I'll go out there and pound this thing into submission, and the thing swallows him, and he winds up inside the belly of a whale again.
And they could not resist Jonah in the belly of a whale. But it's interesting because they talk, and I swear to you that there have been references to the ultra energy beast that gave him his powers.
Yeah, we've seen this before.
Where we've seen that creature look more like and be referred to as a space whale.
Yes.
But
that's why I was like, is this really a space whale, or is they just calling everything big that floats in space a space whale?
Well, whatever it is, it has poor oral hygiene.
Oh, yeah, that's what happens when you just eat metal and don't brush.
Exactly. Brush your teeth after you eat a big stack of molybdenum, kids. Ultra Boy manages to stick his flashlight into Moby-Dick's cavities, causing the beast to cry out in pain, and then Ultra Boy is able to escape at super speed.
So here's the weird thing. Ultra Boy comes back to Earth, and he's like, guys, we have to mount this expedition. We have to go capture this thing. I've been inside of it. And then suddenly Lightning Lad steps out of this rocket ship and he's like, I am the most qualified to lead this mission because I know all about Super Moby-Dick.
Right.
And I'm like, wait a minute. Wouldn't Ultra Boy, who's been inside this thing, who's had experience with other space whales, who has just recently battled this thing, wouldn't he be the person most qualified to lead this expedition?
Well, they don't really bring that up, although Superboy does question whether Lightning Lad is in his right mind. But Lightning Lad quotes chapter and verse, clause 14, subclause 8 of the Legion Constitution, that clearly states that he should be in command. And I think it's the fact that they don't want to go look it up because it's such a pain in the neck to find.
Such a big book.
Yeah, it's a huge book, and it's down in the basement because you know that headquarters is like an iceberg, man.
Oh yeah, it's all over. It's all over the place.
You have to go down
to 15
floors.
subchambers. Yeah.
You have to go past the 9 Planets ice cream parlor. It's so much trouble.
So here's the thing: they go into space trying to track the giant space Moby-Dick, and from space, and this turns into a literal retelling of Moby-Dick because Lightning Lad becomes Ahab, the whale that took his leg. In this case, it took his arm. He's going to kill the beast. And everyone's like, oh, no, we can't do this. Even when Superboy and Colossal Boy figure out a great plan to like trap the beast without really killing it and getting it out of harm's way, Lightning Lad goes insane. I mean, this is really, it's not a literal retelling of Moby-Dick because there's no one in here who's Quay. And...
I think Lightning Lad's a little cray-cray. Does that count?
Well, yes. Also, please don't say cray-cray. Also, there's no floating coffins. But they do get to go to the world of the dead robots.
Right.
And I want to go to the world of the dead robots.
Saturn Girl does get to say, call me Imra.
She does get to say that.
Yeah, for that is my name.
So they go to the planet of the dead robots, even though Lightning Lad is like, I'm going to kill this thing. I'm going to kill it dead. He gets out and he starts shooting beams out of his giant arm that Dr. What's-His-Face has Twitterfied.
Dr. Lanfear. Sidebar for a moment.
Okay, sure. Let's sidebar.
Do you remember the puppet planetoid?
Yes, I do.
Are there really that many lost races of giants with their abandoned planets around the world? Or is this the same giants who abandoned the puppet planetoid with their giant mechanical robots?
No, I'd like to think that this is the world of dead robots. This is literally a world in the future where robot wars were real. And so they would actually have giant robots fighting each other. And then, their entire race just died off because they were too enthralled with betting on these giant robot wars.
Like a Wall-E situation?
Yeah, that they just weren't paying attention to their own healthcare systems.
That's terrible.
So anyway, Lightning Lad shoots this thing, doesn't kill it. Instead, it shrinks down to the size of a guppy, just like in Moby-Dick. You remember that scene, Matthew?
Yeah. Ahab shrinks it down.
Yeah.
And then he gives it to Tom and Jerry, who put it in a tiny bottle. And then the closing music, dun, 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 dun.
And then Dr. Fanleer, or whatever his name is, like, you see, his name was Dickie Mo all the time.
Dickie Mo, arr, arr. Dr. Lanfear actually,
Zamfir? He's got a magic flute.
No, Dr. Lancome and his miracle foundation, he reveals that after spending half the issue worrying that it's his fault that Lightning Lad is obsessed because he's the one who removed Lightning Lad's arm and replaced it with a cyborg duplicate, he reveals that it is in fact his fault. He created the Super Moby-Dick of space.
Oh, the Super Dicky Mo of space.
Dicky Mo.
And so, yeah, so
that's one of the weird Tom and Jerry's done by Gene Deitch in like West Germany. So it's all like,
but there is kind of a cool thing that goes on here, right? I mean, we do see this concept of, this idea of you've meddled in God's domain, right? And you've created a monster. And so science, you have to be a little careful about science, because if you don't know what you're doing, it's going to cause great harm. We also see somebody trying to make restitution and trying to, in a way, let Lightning Lad have some revenge on this whale, even though he's the one that confides with the doctor, and the doctor is telling him what really happened. And so Lightning Lad is kind of keeping it a secret. This seems like a case, though, where Lightning Lad should have told his friends what was going on.
Yes, but again, Legionnaires, they're teens. And in this case, you can almost buy it as the kind of thing that a teenager would do. He's like, well, he swore me to secrecy.
Yeah.
I had to keep his secret.
Yeah.
But I do love the fact that Lightning Lad shows that even though he was acting weird, even though he was acting super, super intense, it was all for a good cause. He was actually trying to protect Dr. Lancome.
Mm-hmm.
Let's come up with a better one.
Dr. Zamfir.
Zamfir, master of the pan flute.
Master of the pan flute. Yep.
Yeah. Dr. Man.
So a couple of things. First of all, this is a retelling of Moby-Dick, kind of a light version.
Sort of,
but if you actually wanted to skip that giant, long novel from Melville, you could actually go and find comic books of the time that would tell you the adventures of Moby-Dick.
That is correct. You could actually buy issue number 5 of Gilberton Publishing's Classics Illustrated. And Classics Illustrated started like 20 years before this, started back in the 40s.
Mm-hmm.
And it was designed specifically to take advantage of the fact that children of the 40s would read comic books but might not read literature. So they would give you not fully, because you can't do 300 pages of Moby-Dick in a 68-page comic, but they would give you illustrated versions of classic tales of literature. The first one was Three Musketeers, and then there was Snickers. No, wait, I'm sorry. I'm thinking of what I had for lunch. Then they did Ivanhoe, A Tale of Two Cities, Robin Hood, and some of them are really wonderful. I've actually read the Moby-Dick adaptation, and it's not bad. But the ones that really got me, there's a Robinson Crusoe that is really incredible. And if you go far enough and you get into like who is the Call of the Wild guy?
Oh, I don't know.
I can't remember. Jack somebody. You get into that stuff. It's got really interesting takes on things. And much like Cliff Notes, Classics Illustrated will not allow you to fake your whole book report.
Right.
But
there are huge. That is one thing to say, that the Classics Illustrated takes huge liberties with these tales. Now, I'm not saying that they're changing character names or anything like that, but
they actually do in some cases.
They do lift out large portions of material. And I would argue that, Classics Illustrated, like you said, Matthew, started in the 40s, but they have continuously reprinted those tales today. And I'm not talking about just like, hey, we've got a new artist and new writer coming on board, let's tell Moby-Dick again. No, they're literally taking issue number 5, and this is like the 20th volume of issue number 5 that they have released in the last, in the last decade. And so if you get a chance, go check out Classics Illustrated.
Yeah, and the thing about Classics Illustrated that's really bizarre is they were in print for 30 years, and you can find 6, 7, 10 different versions and variants of the classic comics or Classics Illustrated books. And, back when I used to grade comics for a living, Classics Illustrated were literally the thing that you feared more than anything. Because for the first 15 or 20 years in a Classics Illustrated, they reprinted it verbatim, including the original publication date.
Oh, cool.
So you have to go through and you have to jump through 3 different hoops and look at a particular ad in the back to figure out which version you have. But every one of them is worth reading. Even the stinky ones are really fun and really interesting chunks of comic history.
Now, if you want something that's a little bit more of an accurate take on Moby-Dick and you still want it in your comic book form, there is a graphic novel adaptation of the book that came out from Dark Horse Comics not too long ago that I think that you will get a huge kick out of. We talked about it on the Major Spoilers podcast, which is another podcast we do. It was episode 750, Moby-Dick, go and listen to that, and we'll talk about it. The illustrations in that book are fantastic. But again, it's not a complete word-for-word translation, but it is super accurate.
Yeah. And you know what I realized in this issue?
What's that?
How much I missed Hamilton and Fort. I mean,
I do like those two together.
Yeah, Jim Mooney is an American treasure, don't get me wrong, but this issue, the Legionnaires look young. They look kind of heroic. They look different. But this plot, this issue's Hamilton plot, is almost unnecessarily complex and convoluted, but it's so much more charming and so much more positive than what we got from Adventure 331. And again, I don't want it to seem like we're crapping on Jerry Siegel or anything. You know, Siegel's
he introduced the flight rings. I mean, that's awesome.
Yeah, Jerry Siegel. If you were to say to me, you know, Jerry Siegel is one of America's writers, I could not disagree with that. But I really love the fact that the Legion in Adventure 332 under Hamilton's pen is so much more clever than the Legion in Adventure 331. And it seems like they're kinder. They want to help their friend who may have gone crazy, but they're not going to call him out on it or be a jerk about it.
Yeah.
And finally, at the end, we discover that he actually was never, he was never a problem. He was actually trying to protect someone else's confidence, which I just feel like it's more positive and to me more Legion-esque.
The only thing that I don't like a lot about Hamilton when he's doing stuff, and Siegel does this a little bit as well, is there's a secret flashback that none of the readers were able to see, or maybe we dropped this clue, and so that seems to be the out. Right. Here and there. So that would be the only thing that I don't like about it. But yeah, this did not get into Crazy Town with Lightning Lad, throwing everyone in the brig and ramming the ship into the space whale, anything like that. So you're right, it's a lot nicer. One thing that I want to talk about that I found rather interesting and something that popped into my head was at the end of the issue, the doctor or the scientist is like, "Hey, Lightning Lad, don't be too upset about losing your arm, because with our arm growing technologies that we have, maybe one of these days we'll be able to grow you a new arm." And
we're planning an arm and leg bank.
Yes.
And I could have sworn it is illegal to traffic in arms across the lines of different planets.
But here's the thing. We're talking about cloning, right? The first ever demonstrated artificial embryo twinning. Do you know what year that happened, Matthew?
1972.
No, 1885. This is where they cloned a sea urchin.
No way.
Where they had an artificial embryo and they made a twin of another sea urchin. Now, as we start to go up the scale, a salamander was cloned in 1902. Another salamander was cloned in 1928 that had a cell nucleus. How do we know
it wasn't just a clone of the same salamander?
Oh, maybe it was. So the first successful nuclear transfer for cloning was 1952 with a frog. And then in 1958, they had a nuclear transfer from a differentiated cell. And I don't know what that means.
A differentiated cell is a cell that is specific to, I don't know. I want to say that I know what that is, but I can't think of how to describe it in a way that doesn't.
So it says that John Gordon transplanted the nucleus of a tadpole intestinal cell into an enucleated frog egg. In this way, he created tadpoles that are genetically identical to the ones from which the intestinal cells were taken.
I think differentiated cells are cells that have a specialized function in whatever creature they are. They're not just general material. They're a multicellular organism that has a specific function.
You were really close when you said 1970, whatever. The first mammalian embryo that was created by nuclear transfer happened in 1975, and it was a rabbit. And then, of course, we had Dolly the sheep in 1984.
Right.
And then we had a cow in 87, another sheep in 1996. Oh, I'm sorry, Dolly was also 1996. That was the first mammal created from somatic cell nuclear transfers.
Right. And then, of course, we had Michael Keaton in 1996.
Yes.
Who was cloned 4 times.
I thought it was 8 times.
One of them was a clone of a clone.
Yes.
We're spitting on bugs, dumber. Steve. Yeah.
Now listen, the first primate was a rhesus monkey in 1997. So we might be getting closer to getting Lightning Lad his arm back.
That's pretty cool.
So in the cloning aspects, I mean, that's kind of neat. And people are talking still today about using stem cells to regrow limbs. They've grown ears on the backs of mice that they could then transplant onto people. It's
so
totally fascinating.
It was a rhesus monkey?
Yes.
So they cloned him from Reese's Pieces?
Yes, they did. Exactly. A monkey and Reese's Pieces got it on.
A monkey.
And that's how we have Reese's Pieces today. There's one final thing that I find super fascinating about this issue that it got me thinking. Was people with disabilities, heroes that have disabilities. And I was wondering, is this the first time that we see a hero with a disability? And the answer is no. Or no. I don't know whether we should say disability or a handicap. But when we look at Lightning Lad, he's not the first, although he may become the most powerful. Mm-hmm. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the very first person with a disability who was a hero was Dr. Midnight from 1941.
I would agree with that assessment. I can't think of anybody who would predate Dr. Midnight.
Now, Dr. Midnight, his power is, even though he's blind, he can see in total darkness.
Right. And what year was Freddie Freeman?
So Freddie Freeman, Captain Marvel Jr., he was crippled in a fight by, what is it, Captain Nazi or something like this?
Yeah, Captain Nazi, and he had to walk with a cane, or with a crutch, actually.
He also came out in 1941.
But later, because I want to say that he was in late 41, and then McNider was in early 41.
Yeah, so 41 seems to be about the first point where we see people with disabilities come out with superhero powers. Mm-hmm. When Marvel comes around, and so I was like, okay, so that should be pretty good. And there may be others, and so I was just doing a really quick search. We have in 1963 I'm sorry, 1962. Let's do this chronologically. 1962, we have Thor, and I know people are saying, well, what about Thor? Well, if you think about Donald Blake, he also had a disability.
Right. Donald Blake had to walk with a walking stick or a cane because he had, I believe they referred to it as a lame foot, which is no longer.
I don't know what. Yeah. I don't mean to offend. I just don't know the right terms for it. Yeah.
Certainly. That was the term in 1962. We would not use that today.
1963, Charles Xavier appears. We don't know what his deal is, but he's in a wheelchair.
He was shot. No, not shot. He was struck by a boulder while fighting Lucifer and was left paraplegic.
Right. 1964, we have Daredevil. He went blind because a chemical spilled into his eyes. Also gave him the ability to basically do a Dr. Midnight.
Right.
And then I'm sure we've had a lot more, but the other one that pops up into my mind that is... and I don't know if Dr. Midnight was born blind or if this was something that happened later in life.
He was born blind, to my knowledge.
But in 1984, we have Jericho, who was born mute.
He was actually not born mute. His voice box was damaged when someone tried to murder him to get even with his father, Deathstroke.
Well, there we go. So see, I messed up on that. But those are some of the heroes that have a disability or have I would say they have a disability, but are still heroes nonetheless. And we can add Lightning Lad into that in 1965. Are there any others that pop into your mind?
Batgirl was shot by the Joker and became Oracle.
Right.
I would say Cyborg. Victor Stone lost all 4 of his limbs. For a while in the 90s or the 2000s, I believe that Moon Knight was in a wheelchair.
Well, don't forget Hawkeye. He's deaf.
Right.
Or partially.
Hawkeye at least has severe hearing loss. Komodo of Avengers, the Initiative, was missing her legs. She lost her legs in an accident and used Kurt Connor's lizard formula to become super.
Do we know of anyone who was actually born with a disability that became a superhero?
Eddie McDonough, the Hornet from Slingers, has or had, I believe the character's now dead, had cerebral palsy.
Okay.
And built his armor. He was, super brilliant. He built his armor to help with the issues he had with cerebral palsy. Doctor Strange's injuries to his hands were a neurological handicap or disability. Depending on how you define it, a Legion, you remember
with mental issues.
Right. I believe they define him as multiple personality disorder, if that's still a thing.
Yeah. So here's the thing, though. What's neat about this is In the 1940s and through the 60s, it would not have been uncommon to meet somebody who had a missing arm or a leg because they lost it in the war, or someone who was confined to a wheelchair or to crutches because of polio.
The chief from the Doom Patrol was confined to a wheelchair.
Yeah, so what we're seeing here is, and I'm not saying that this is DC Comics and Edward Hamilton going in and saying, hey, representation matters.
Right.
But when we look at these long list of characters and you're wondering, hey, does anybody really care if Hawkeye is partially deaf or has hearing loss? And the answer is yes, because there's a great story of a little kid who would not wear his hearing aid. And the mom was just like, oh man, I wish there was some way that we could get him to wear his hearing aid. And she wrote to Marvel, and Marvel did this whole story where they took this kid and put him into a story with Hawkeye. And Hawkeye's, look, I wear my hearing aid. I have to do this if I'm going to be a hero. And he and this kid go out and have a little adventure together. And
that's neat.
It's really a touching story that you can go and find out. So when people say, hey, what's with all this representation, and representation doesn't matter, it actually does matter in comics. And it's good to see, someone who is overweight in the case of Bouncing Boy, or someone who is missing an arm or a leg in the case of Lightning Lad, or someone who's just kind of like a dingus in the case of
Sunboy.
Sunboy.
Yeah, Sunboy is a dingus. Echo of the New Avengers is hearing impaired. Yeah. I remember that.
There you go.
Luke Skywalker lost a hand. Yeah.
They're all out there. So, there you go. Matthew, I think we've come to the end of another Legion Clubhouse, which always leads to, what have we learned this week?
I learned that they could show a cemetery full of tombstones in 1965 so long as it was drawn really well by Kurt Swan.
I also learned that you could put Marv Wolfman on the cover and not get in trouble, although that has nothing to do with these issues.
We learned that if you are a dedicated fan and really put your mind to it, you can be the next Bob Rozakis or Cary Bates.
There you go, listeners. That wraps it up for this installment of the Legion Clubhouse. Thank you so much for being a part of our adventures, and we want these adventures to continue. So what are you waiting for? Head over to patreon.com/major spoilers. Every little bit helps and can keep this show going far into the future. So until next time, I'm Stay Golden, Pony Boy.
And I'm Lad Backwards Words Say To You Die.
The Legion Clubhouse is a production of Major Spoilers Entertainment, LLC, and is produced by Steven Schleicher. Your hosts were Matthew Peterson and Steven Schleicher. You can follow Matthew at Mighty King Cobra and Steven at Major Spoilers. You can follow this podcast on Twitter at Legion Clubhouse. If you have questions or comments, send them to podcast@majorspoilers.com. I'm Jason Inman. Until next time, eat it, Grandpa.
This podcast is copyright 2018 by Major Spoilers Entertainment, LLC.